Interoperability and Standards. It is October 9th, and I'm pleased to have with me some of the world's experts on these topics join me, and they will be having a panel discussion in the second half of this webinar. In the first half, I'll be making a presentation going over some of the initial concepts and the status of many different standards. It's my pleasure to conduct this webinar. It's been it's always a journey, but we've been working together, many of us on this call, for many years on these topics. And I'd like to mention that this is going to be recorded. This is being recorded at this time. It will be made available from the area YouTube channel. All listeners are in listen-only mode, but I would like to ask you to answer questions. Don't hesitate to put those questions in the GoToMeeting questions section. There's a webinar feature, and we will be taking those at the end of the webinar. I'd also like to remind you at the end of the webinar, don't leave too soon, because I'll be talking about an upcoming workshop, an in-person workshop being conducted in January in Boston, and I hope that you will consider participating in that. All right, so this is a webinar that is going to go very quickly in the sense that I am going to go over a very large number of slides, and the goal in my having compiled an enormous number of slides, thanks to those people who are on the call today, the expert panelists. My goal is to share with you how broad and how deep standards are, and that there are many mature standards available today that are just not very well known. And there are also some standards that are very, very young, still in the development stage, or in the conceptual stage, just getting their charters approved. And so this high diversity in terms of the areas within the ecosystem and where they fit in the overall picture of enterprise AR is very complicated, and I do want to share with you what we can today. And I guess I wanted to start with this slide because it expresses not only the different kinds of entities in the AR ecosystem, but within standards as well. There is an awful lot of non-commercial entities that participate in the development of interoperability and standards. And to the extent that it is in their business interest, there are many large enterprises. I haven't seen very many small enterprises, but they are there. They often are very busy, but they are there in terms of their requirements and how they need standards to fit into the ecosystem and to bring more value to the end customer. Speaking of that end customer, as I mentioned at the beginning, it's been many years that we have thought about the interoperable augmented reality universe and what that might look like. And in the last 12 to 18 months, there has been a clear, resounding hum of pain from enterprise customers that want to introduce AR at a larger scale than they have today. They would like to be able to introduce these technologies into their business systems, but the closed technology silos that are available to them are limiting. And these are some of the things that they say or they're expressing, that in fact some core technologies are extremely important in some environments, maybe indoor. Some core technologies might be extremely important for 3D, but not all enterprise customers need the same technology at the same time. So they can't choose how fast or how slow and where investments are made. There's also certainly AR represents the convergence of many technologies, and there are complementary systems like artificial intelligence, the Internet of Things, and 3D graphics. And those are also maturing at different speeds. So there's this unevenness. The terrain is very difficult to negotiate. There's also many companies that have already invested small numbers of units, maybe 10 or 50 units, and they don't want to throw away what they've already purchased in order to be able to keep up with the most advanced and useful technologies that are available to them. They also want to pick and choose their vendor partners. They want to choose the experts for specific parts of a solution. And when you have technology silos that are closed, it can an enterprise can incur a lot of integration costs because everything is custom. So realizing this, about 2 years ago, there started to be dialogue within the area about customer needs. And with participation of area members and thought leaders, we developed what we call the Schema of customer needs. And I'm bringing this up because it shows you kind of where interoperability fits in. It's really not appropriate or not so helpful when you're talking about the use case definition and choosing the best use cases. But when you start talking about integrating your solution, you can start to say, I would like to have the optics from one company. I'd like to have the back end and the databases and the 3D publishing systems from another company. And so your customers are looking for multi-vendor solutions, and they don't want to have to invest heavily in custom engineering. They also want to integrate further down the road when they get more confidence in AR. They will want to integrate with existing IT. And this is really where the rub is. This is where we're hitting the wall and a lot of people are unable to proceed. And so that's impacting everybody, the customers as well as the providers of technologies. Realizing that the sound was getting a little bit louder, the area put together our interoperability and standards program to start talking, to have a better, richer dialogue with those of you on the call as well as others, and to advance the development of these standards through a variety of programs. This information is on the website, so on the area website under the interoperability menu. Don't hesitate to go there to learn more, but this is an example of thought leadership content that we're sharing in order to enrich this dialogue and have a better understanding of the opportunities. We also are developing workshops to better crystallize and to articulate interoperability requirements, those specifically of the end customers. These workshops are very use case focused, and the first one is planned for early January or mid-January in Boston at the PTC headquarters, and it will focus on people using AR on the shop floor. These workshops are defined and there is invitation on the area website under the events menu, and I encourage all of you to check that out and share it with your colleagues. So what does all of this mean? I like to begin talking about enterprise interoperability with some text. I know that's not the most intuitive, but I think that the words that are bolded on this screen are really the most important, is that there are components that are subcomponents. There are going up from displays, there's whole systems and solutions and services that need to exchange data to serve the end customer, to visualize that information in context. And we can expect a very heterogeneous or multi-vendor environment. We want that data to flow smoothly, safely, securely, without needing to go through translations, conversions, and perhaps loss of resolution or delays. Now to take the picture view of this definition of enterprise interoperability, you can see in this little graphic in the corner here that there are lots of different components. We're familiar with most of these components, and the AR expertise is really in how does that appear into the user, how does it communicate effectively, and so the highlighted or lifted panels are really central to AR systems and services. But we're aware that already today and increasingly in the future, there'll be multi-vendor enterprise AR systems. And together they have to be able to integrate and produce solutions displayed in either a wearable device, a handheld device, or a projection AR solution. So these components need to work together to provide a solution. That's the first part of this figure. And then further out, or in parallel, really, they need to be able to integrate with the enterprise management systems and the business management systems in order to provide the instructions, to provide that the data that's captured by an AR device goes to the right place at the right time, that it can be used in predictive analytics and many other valuable services we envisage in the digital transformation. So this kind of summarizes for me what I want you to think about when you're talking about interoperability. There are many different components, lots of different expertise. We're going to see a much greater diversity in the future than we have today, because more and more people are going to want to address their specific use cases. And the customers and the systems integrators are going to need to build and expand on these systems long after they put them in 2020 or even in 2019. They're going to be building these for many, many years. And they have to fit into this enterprise ecosystem. This does not have augmented reality on it. It just is a way of illustrating how terribly complex an enterprise IT and business management system can be. So why, I touched on this before, but this is just a recap, why we would want interoperability, primarily for end customers, the enterprise customers, to have greater choice, control over the evolution, flexibility in the solutions and use cases that they address with a lower total cost of ownership. Users also benefit. The technology providers will benefit from having the ability to differentiate themselves by specializing in specific components or parts of a service or solution that they can bring value that's exceptional or rare. And they'll be able to better collaborate with other companies if they have interoperable interfaces identified. Systems integrators will be able to provide more customized solutions and be able to meet the needs of their end customers more quickly and at lower cost. Now I'm going to flip into talking to you for a good 10 minutes very quickly about many different standards that are in existence today. I don't expect you to remember everything on the next 40 slides, but I do want to tell you that this is the tip of the iceberg. These are the ones that I watch most closely, and I think that everyone who cares about interoperability and seeking interoperability will want to be paying attention. The only one I won't be speaking about in detail is the Immersive Web Working Group from the W3C. It is the project of a current area research project. It's the focus of that research project, and we expect to have a webinar about that topic in a couple of months. So I'm going to hold off and wait until that one matures, because it's not quite time yet. So with us today, we have Neil Trevitt. He is the president of the Kronos Group. This slide is simply to emphasize the diversity, the number of different companies that are Kronos members, and the emphasis also on silicon acceleration for graphics rendering and other computationally intensive tasks like augmented reality. We know that rendering is not the only computationally intensive task that we need for AR to be delivered. This is to show you the breadth of different projects, initiatives, and existing standards, even standards that have been around for, gosh, I think decades, if I'm not mistaken. Collada has probably been around that long. But it's not only about the standards, it's also about the communities of people who get together and collaborate. And then once the standard is in place, the community that implements these standards and helps to make sure that they're certified, that the solutions are clean and very efficient. The two standards that are, in my opinion, from the Kronos Group that are the most important, one is the Gltf. That is a way of bringing compression and a standard way, a widely accepted way of compressing and transmitting assets between devices, between databases, and also between any user device. So you can see that Gltf, if you haven't heard about it, has been now available for almost 4 years. It's relatively mature. However, it hasn't stopped evolving. On the contrary, today they're still they are seeking requirements for the next generation of GLTF. I guess you call that 3.0, although it's next gen GLTF. And I want to underline that all standards groups that are worth participating in will be seeking requirements continuously. And so even though you have industry adoption at a certain level of maturity, that's not a reason to stop evolving standards. The second standard that is at the very, very young end of the spectrum is the OpenXR. It's both for VR and AR. It is to deliver cross-platform AR and VR experiences. It has a life cycle perspective, and it's designed as an alternative, another approach to the Vulkan, which is an acceleration and a 3D rendering and compositing. So the two work together, but OpenXR is supposed to be focused really on those XR experiences, AR and VR. Just released a few months ago and going through the last stages now, and I'm sure that everybody can begin to implement this today. There's already, in fact, been implementations already published and announced. So this is very much in the ramp up stage and something to pay attention to. The Kronos group is also very supportive and has long been involved in web-based technologies. And the example of that was WebGL in collaboration with the W3C. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, the W3C is working on the immersive web working group of the W3C is working on WebXR, and there'll be going forward an increasingly close collaboration between WebXR and OpenXR in order to be able to deliver that kind of acceleration that we expect and that we need. In addition, there's always going to continue to be more collaboration between specific execution engines and the web in order to make the lower friction for users who want to use the web for delivery of experiences. And so this picture is to say that the collaboration between standards development organizations is very important. Very, very recently, there's been some developments of a 3D commerce working group. I'm not going to take the time to explain this in detail, but I want to show you that the 3D commerce working group is very much in context with the Kronos strategy for delivering value from high performance silicon. So that is all I'm going to say on Kronos. The second standards group that I want to showcase for you is the Open Geospatial Consortium. Today with us we have Scott Simmons, who's the Chief Operations Officer. The OGC, as you can see, has also been established many years ago and has a great number of members, diverse members, diversity also in terms of its geography. And this is another graphic that you're expected to memorize or to understand fully, but it is to show you all of the different areas within the data stack, within the data management framework where OGC standards are. And Scott has added these red arrows to show and to emphasize those standards and zones really where AR can benefit from OGC standards. So OGC was involved and understood the importance of AR a long time ago and worked on that. We worked on that, I think, for a few years from 2014 to 2015, 16, around there. At the time when this when this picture was taken, there were a great many people using not web AR, but AR browsers, and they were able to benefit from this preliminary foray into AR interoperability. But probably more important or equally important is KML, which is a technology that came out of Google and was passed and adopted by the Open Geospatial Consortium. It's maintained by the Open Geospatial Consortium, and heavy use got shared with me for AR in certain industries. And so maybe he'll be able to share more about that with us. Another specification which has a lot of potential to help us outdoors and in construction and many, many different industries is the City GML. This is also a very mature specification that has hundreds of implementations and if not thousands, tens of thousands of users today. In addition, over the last few years, some of the same principles of this GML family have been brought and added to some great algorithms for indoor positioning. So the indoor GML allows people to, in a standard fashion, express where they are and to move around within spaces being navigated through a standard, an interoperable data set. Another standard is moving features encoding. Maybe we'll be able to come back to this, but I don't want to lose sight of it because human beings move around, and so do many of the things that we're interested in paying attention to, like vehicles, airplanes, ships, and so forth. There's also been a real significant change in the OGC's strategy with respect to its specifications and exposing those in languages and protocols that are familiar and more lightweight than ever before, to be more suitable to mobile platforms such as wearable AR devices. The 3D portrayal standard is another option that people are largely unfamiliar with, but very important in enabling us. And there should soon be the GeoPose standard. This is a new standard work that's being discussed and a charter developed. We expect to start work on this very soon. Now, a couple of other standards organizations, the ETSI industry specification groups focusing on augmented reality and more specifically on the interoperability of AR components. So this group has been around for, I think, almost 2 years. They're finishing up the 2 years and has a diverse membership, academics, research, but also industry players and some with a deep experience in augmented reality. The ISG has been, over the past couple of years, has completed a survey and has published 2 items, the industrial use cases paper and the AR standards landscape, which can be downloaded. And now they're completing work on the AR framework architecture, building upon previous architectures and adding new concepts such as the concepts of supporting AR cloud and more cloud and edge computing. The ETSI ARF group has, as I said, has already completed 2 documents that are available for download, finalizing that reference architecture for AR. And we're currently working together, the area and the ETSI ISG, to develop to do some surveying and interviews around provider requirements for interoperability. Expect to see more about that very soon. There's going to be a page on the area website describing more how we're going to go about that, and you'll be hearing more as we go. There's also going to be, I think, before the end of the year, a call for implementations of components of this architecture. The IEEE has been talking and working on interoperability for decades and decades in many other industries, and as early as 2015, 14 or 15, was already beginning to discuss how augmented reality would fit in. Today, there are 2 working groups, the P2048, that's a very large working group with many sub-working groups. It started 2 years ago and has gone through a revamping just in the last few months, and they expect to begin or resume work on some standards. When I say the family of P2048, I really mean a family. They're really taking a very comprehensive approach and looking at many different aspects, though to my knowledge, nothing concrete has been published and is quite primitive, but that doesn't mean that they won't have great impact going further down the road. A specification, the IEEE Standards Association is much further along, in which I've had an active role in, is P1589, the ARLM standard, which defines actions and objects. And then it also defines an activity description language and a workplace description language. And I'm very pleased to have the support of Brent Darg from Boeing as part of the leadership team on this specification and working group. We're just going into the second reballoting, so it's very exciting, and feel like we're getting close to being able to do a promotion about this. The current specification, as it's written, does get into a lot of base schema, but it's also extendable, and there are examples in XML and JSON. IEC is also very familiar with augmented reality. For many years, there's been a subcommittee on computer graphics. It's managed by BSI, an area member. BSI joined the area earlier in 2019. There are many standards in these two different working groups within SC24. And yeah, it's a very exciting place. Most of the work is being done in Korea and Japan, but it is an international group, so anybody who wants to can join. The Web3D Consortium also is nested under this. This is how the Web3D Consortium has published to date all of the versions of the X3D standard for Web3D. The specification in which I was directly involved as a co-editor was the reference model for mixed and augmented reality, and that was just finalized and published in August of 2019 after 4 years of work. I did mention a very important specification, X3D. There's many extensions and encodings, and it is widely used, and there's a lot of material about it. And again, like the Kronos group, good collaboration with the W3C. Just to show you how you can have at one spectrum industries, standards organizations that are 50 or 100 years old working on AR. The UMI 3D Consortium is brand new, just formed last week. In fact, had their founding kickoff meeting. This is a consortium defining a web protocol that will permit people to collaborate with AR and VR devices when they're using 3D assets. Something that it's a challenge that many people see coming down the pipeline and don't currently have a way to address interoperably. So we know that people are going to be in different places or even in the same location, and they're going to need to collaborate, and this is one strategy. So they are taking an open source approach, and they have many different working groups, and they're going to be focusing a lot in the next few months and years, I suspect, to advance their specifications. Believe it or not, I got through a lot of slides in the time that I had hoped to, and it's my pleasure now to turn to the panel discussion for today's webinar. I think there are lots of questions that people have, and more questions than there are answers. But I think many of these topics can be the subject of entire days of workshops and debates. But today we would only be able to dedicate the remainder of this hour to these and to topics that you may have and want to ask in the question interface. I'm pleased to be able to share this webinar with 4 experts, and I'd like to ask Carl to introduce yourself. Just give us a couple of words so we can hear your voice. Carl?
Absolutely, Christine. My name is Carl Byers. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer and CTO for ContextAir, and we are a provider in the AR landscape, delivering AI-based industrial guidance solutions for field-based workers.
And a founding sponsor member of the area. And
that
you're
is
also, thank you, Carl.
And on the board, exactly.
That's right. Thank you, Carl. Greg?
Yes, thank you, Christine. My name is Greg Garrett. I'm the Senior Ergonomics Lead for Boeing, South Carolina. I've been working in the AR space for the last couple of years in support of multi-devices out onto our production system floor from a safety perspective. I also share the co-chair role for the safety committee for the area group as well.
Thank you, Greg, and it's really an important committee. We're very pleased that you can contribute your time to that. Scott?
Hello, everyone. I'm Scott Simmons. I'm the Chief Operations Officer with the Open Geospatial Consortium, and I also happen to be the Director of our Standards Program. Prior to my time at OGC as a staff member, I was a quite active member working on a number of standards, including the Augmented Reality Markup Language Standard.
Thanks, Scott. He's got his finger on the pulse. Neil, thank you for joining us.
Hey, Christine. Hey, everyone. So I'm Neil. My day job is at NVIDIA, where I work to develop ecosystems for our developers. And I've been the president of the Kronos Group for over 15 years now.
And you have been a strong advocate for AR and also have spearheaded the development of the Gltf group in part, in anticipation of it being useful for AR.
Yep. We'd like to call AR our dream application because it uses everything we do pretty much.
Exactly. It's the toughest nut to crack. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. So I'd like to sort of start at the top, and many of us understand the reasons why we're passionate about augmented reality and making it interoperable. But oftentimes there's resistance on the part of the providers of technology because, well, for many good reasons. Carl, can you share with us from your perspective as a technology provider, what are the pros and cons, and how do you rationalize interoperability?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Christine, because it kind of divides the landscape into kind of two camps. There's a camp that looks at interoperability as an opportunity to create a market and to grow a market and to provide thought leadership and value to their customers and to decrease the long-term life cycle for any deployed system. And then there's the other camp that says I'd rather have vendor lock-in, so interoperability isn't as a great a concern for what I'm trying to do. We view that, and I view that interoperability is really critical. It does provide that opportunity to grow the customer base, to be the leader, and to provide value to our customers in helping them chart the way forward in an environment that is quite complex. It does allow us to increase the market size and increase the domain applicability of the solutions that we offer without having to customize and custom develop things every single time. I think that's where the core value is. The challenge is in the evolution of something like augmented reality is if you come in too early with a landscape of a vast number of potential standards and initiatives, is you do risk choosing it wrong. And I think that's the fine line that organizations and providers and implementers need to walk. You need to be able to have the insights, but at the same time have the flexibility to adapt. You don't want to be in the VHS versus Betamax environment and choose the wrong platform or the wrong standard moving forward. So that's a challenge for providers, and it's also a challenge for implementers.
Mm-hmm. And Greg, do you want to add something about how you, as an enterprise, encourage companies to develop interoperable products? I mean, you're in contact with technology providers, maybe not Greg yourself in your role, but your organizations and the IT departments have thousands of suppliers. What is the position?
So, and I think it kind of goes back to what you and I were discussing yesterday, that a lot of the burden for us as a company to develop and put out these different types of technology goes through, or can go through, years of pilot testing, design reviews, making sure that it's safe to put in our production systems and meets those requirements, whether it be from an environmental standpoint, such as, does the device get too warm? Is it going to be in a hazardous work environment? So for us as a customer, it makes it extremely difficult, or it makes it a very lengthy process. And so having those standards by which we can pull things more as COTS or off the shelf items that we know that have been vetted and follow a certain quality requirements, or I can't think of the specific words I'm trying to say, but I think you're getting the point. Definitely shortens that time frame for us to actually use and deploy these systems out into our production system. So to us,
and being able to comply with existing procedures, existing products, and so forth.
Correct.
And you, in your special case of safety, just to take an example, there are technical standards, there are regulations, and many things like that. I think, how do you, I'm going to go to the next topic, which is the diversity of standards. And I open this up to everybody, but, it's, I think the last 2 years ago when I counted, it was about 35 standards that were directly applicable in one way or another, not tangentially, but could directly be used in an AR solution. It's so difficult for an organization like Boeing or any large organization to choose. How are we going to make our way through that? How can we give guidance on this problem?
Well, I think this is Neil. This is a complex environment, and as you stated in your presentation, Christine, and the essence of any interoperability standard is to let two things communicate, whether it's hardware to software, or systems to subsystems, or different systems communicating. And the challenge, and also the wonderful thing about augmented reality, that it's not a single product from a single company. A complete solution is typically going to be made up of dozens or even hundreds of different hardware and software pieces that need to communicate. And if we're going to enjoy the interoperability and not having the vendor lock-in that Carl was talking about, we need an open standard to enable all these communication channels to be open. And so people often ask me, what is going to be the AR standard? And my answer is, it's going to be a constellation of standards to enable all of the pieces of an AR, a true AR solution in the enterprise to be deployed and maintained.
Right, and so there are specifications at different levels in the technology stack, and then at different interfaces within even one layer of the technology stack. I think that's, and so many standards around data that are so critical, that are already existing or are needed. Scott, can you shed a little bit of, you've got quite a lot of standards in the OGC, some of them very, very appropriate. Can you talk to us about the data standards and how to choose among those? And how do you deal when you have multiple standards to meet the same need?
Sure, Christine. And, it's a good point that why are there so many standards, and everyone does ask that. And a standards development organization, it has sort of three roles incumbent upon it in this proliferation, if you will. Is one, the standards often are developed from the perspective of specific communities and addressing those communities' needs. And if an SDO does its job right, those standards themselves can be interoperable and build upon themselves. And so architecting standards that are somewhat modular and can plug and play with other standards help solve part of this problem. And so we look at that foundational set of data standards as accomplishing different roles for different levels of user sophistication, and ideally differently enabled and still interoperable. So no one needs to have a PhD in geomatics and understand the shape of the earth to drop a map on a website. So let's make those standards easy. But if you've got someone who's got that PhD and wants to do sophisticated work, also enable them with the appropriate standards. So that interoperability is a major issue we have to deal with. A second thing is we need to coordinate with other standards bodies and ensure that as best as possible our standards cross-reference or interoperate. And so as a great example, the Kronos Group and OGC have a formal alliance, and we're working together on a number of projects, including one starting up shortly that will have a significant AR component to it. And then lastly, we all need to take it upon ourselves to do more than just develop standards, but to develop these best practices documents or sort of environments where people can see how one might tie together the appropriate standards and pick from this list that is a bit frightening and overbearing when you first look at it.
So you very gracefully kind of went to the third topic, which was what was the role of SDOs. We don't have to, we can come back to the topic of why so many and how to choose. But one of the things I really like about the OGC is, you know, there was and there is updated a whole architecture, and a specification needs to fit into this architecture. I showed a slide of it, the one with the red arrows pathing through it. Isn't there also a way sometimes for a community standard to be introduced? Can you talk about the community standard development process?
Sure. The OGC a few years ago realized that as great as we thought we were missing the boat on a number of emerging topics. And we're also watching the pace of IT development, particularly with anything having to do with computer graphics moving so rapidly, that we were not adequately responsive, we felt, to where industry needed to go. And so we introduced a concept of what we refer to as community standards. And those are de facto specifications in common use, or specifications developed by other bodies that really aren't standards bodies, but are still quite heavily referenced in the industry. And we can bring those into our process as is, have our membership endorse them as what we refer to as this community standard, one that the community is using, but we see as value. And from us, it helps, one, that it becomes part of our fundamental baseline, and then we can develop other standards that interoperate with those community standards. But to be quite honest, for a lot of people in the real world out there that are not developing standards but having to use them, it makes those standards procurable, and it gets them into official language. And so particularly when working with governments on really large projects, having an endorsement of a standard from an authorized standards development agency organization can be quite valuable from a procurement perspective. And we're seeing rapid uptake of this in our policy right now.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. So you can take a de facto standard and basically codify it and ratify it and put it into more, how should I say it, a controlled environment, or an environment where it will be maintained and nurtured and continued going forward. Are there other roles for Carl? You've worked in some standards development in the past, I think. How does a technology provider view a standards development organization? Is it something where you wait until the work is done and you impatiently tap your foot saying, okay, when are you going to get this right for us? Or is there a time and a place that's appropriate to roll up your sleeves and contribute?
I do think it depends on how much you can invest in the process, because the standards development process tends to be long and arduous. However, it does give you the opportunity to come in early and both understand the direction that you can then roll into your product to be a first mover, as well as provide your own expertise based on your customer experiences in terms of how the standards should evolve. So I think there is value in coming in early, but you need to be there for the long haul. I do think it's also important to know where you're going to to come in. So going back to your point, at what level of the standards activity do you come in to add value? Is it at the data level? Is it at the device information interchange level? Is it at some other aspects of human factors or something? I think one of the things that's missing in this process, though, is something that we experienced back in the, many years ago, looking at interoperable defense simulation applications. And that is, even though you can exchange information and you can ensure that the bits flow and you can swap out a display, it doesn't guarantee that people are experiencing the same thing when they actually engage in an experience. And I think that's one of the challenges when we've got a lot of individual standards and individual sub-capabilities. It looks like the landscape is covered, but in the end, the real question is, if you put two experiences beside each other, are people experiencing exactly the same thing? Because in the end, that is the ultimate demonstration
test.
Verification. Exactly, and we need to put more effort into that.
Really interesting that you bring that up, because as I was building my graphic about interoperability, I went back to graphics that I'd done a very long time ago, and the criteria for, at that time, the criteria that I suggested for interoperability is that you could publish once and have the same have an experience be delivered to multiple devices without needing to recode for a specific device. And that's still a challenge today, right? I mean, every display has unique characteristics, and some of it's predictable, and some of the behaviors are not predictable or less predictable. Very much an issue.
This is Neil. Can I put in a pitch for any end users here to strongly consider joining your favorite SDO? Because not only can you affect the standards, and actually you can have an outsized role. Most standards organizations are constantly in danger of becoming an ivory tower of all of the implementers of these subsystems, defining the standards that they think the real world actually needs. But unless we actually have real world users keeping us grounded and keeping us honest, it's very easy to go off the track. So if you have the time and the investment to participate and make sure that standards are evolving in a real world direction, it's a huge value to the industry. Also, we found that people that are end users that do get engaged with the standardization process actually find the networking to be a big advantage. You're working with a lot of kind of leaders and shakers and movers in the industry. You get a good situational awareness as what's happening, and maybe even find partners and customers in that standards community. It's happened quite often.
That's a really good point, Neil. You kind of very gracefully moved to how should different ecosystem stakeholders support this process. It is a journey, and it is, I think, incumbent upon those who will benefit the most from having a well-written and adopted standards to participate in that process. In a way, it's like if you expect to not participate, but you're just going to wait at the other end and expect something that's well suited to your particular needs, it's not a good risk. And I think an example, just to illustrate that, is the 3D Commerce Working Group. To explain to people a little bit more, I guess it was 6 months or so ago, companies that are retailers who use the web and apps to show products that people can purchase, and they show them in interactive 3D models and so forth, got together, even though they're competitors, because they needed to have some interoperability from their suppliers, so that the suppliers of the models could give the same model to Wayfair as to Target or Walmart or whoever. And they really have been clear about their requirements. It's really the requirements that are leading that working group, not the other way around.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually a really interesting development where that user community that could see that their processes were being held back by bottlenecks and incompatibilities and unclarity in the technical foundation actually proactively came to an SDO, in this case the Kronos Group, kind of demanding a solution, which is totally awesome to have a proactive end user community engaging with the standards process in such a proactive way. Is great.
They felt a shared pain. They had a shared area of friction.
Exactly. I mean, the motivation is simple. It's make more money. If we can work together, the retail community and the technical community working together, the opportunities are immense. So there's a clear motivation.
Right. That's a very good point. And I think to that point, the area I'd like to help some of the customers, some of those end user organizations, whether they're area members or not, learn how to articulate, how to speak about, and how to detect at first the pains, where these are coming from, where these obstacles are coming from. And some of them are from interoperability and some of them are not. But where are they coming from? And also to explain to the providers and those who will write specifications the breadth of the problem. For example, I have users that are sight impaired, I have hearing impaired, I have, so you have a lot of diversity in the user community that you need to have supported through certain specifications. And then there's also a wide variety of environments in which augmented reality is used. The biggest is the indoor-outdoor contrast in more than one way, and how the challenges that are before us in that domain, and some of those challenges will naturally be resolved just through silicon being accelerating better artificial intelligence and making better choices on behalf of the users. But those can't be built from the ground up for every single device for every solution. Greg, could I ask you, how does, what does the Boeing standards organization look like? Or do you have any contact with those people? And do they come to you, people in the line, in the businesses, looking for your requirements? Or is it the other way around, where you go to them?
So I don't really have, in the context that you're referring to, a lot of connections or meetings with that particular group. Now, I will say that if we are in product reviews, in other words, the things that we manufacture, then we are included. The safety is included when we're doing those types of standards or requirements or work. So that way we can apply, from a safety side or ergonomic side, requirements that we have as a company to the development of that particular product or tool that's about to be used in our production system. But as far as what you're referring to,
technical standards, yeah.
Yeah, technical standards. I mean, we do have a group that does do that, and they do review items to make sure that they are meeting, our technical standards, whether it be for safety or for others. So there is a team that does do that. I'm just not a part of that particular group.
But aviation and aerospace are industries that have hundreds of standards, technical standards that are adopted, I would believe, at all companies, and that would be highly appropriate for there to be people talking from a standards to standards level within an industry. Certainly, you couldn't have everybody, let's say airplanes pull up to the gate. They're going to have consistent technical standards and how they're flown and so forth.
Correct. Now, yeah, and from an aviation standpoint, yes, there are certain documents that we have to meet, whether it be a commercial or a defense product. But now within some of those, we have customer requirements within the defense side that we have to meet as well. So there is an overarching aviation standards, but then there are specific set of guidelines based on what our customer is expecting that particular product to do.
Good, good. Thanks for clarifying that. Well, I would like to ask each of you if you've, on the subject that Greg just was talking about, so industries that you know of that have adopted standards or that are providing interoperable solutions that have done so successfully. Neil, do you know of, can you bring us an example that we should model, a role model for us when we grow up, that where standards have played an important role in the success of an industry?
Well, one example which is closely adjacent to AR, its one component is that the 3D graphics market on PCs and mobile devices, both for gaming and professional productivity applications. So totally dependent on all kinds of standards. Your mobile device, the wireless standards, plugging in your USB mouse to the 3D APIs that drive the GPU hardware. Without the standards, then those markets simply wouldn't exist. As we were saying earlier, that the interesting thing about augmented reality is it is much more complex as a whole system. So we're going to need way more standards than markets like just the 3D graphics standing in isolation.
Constellation. Good
the
word.
Constellation, yes, right.
I'm going to use it. Thanks for sharing. Scott,
Christine, I'll give you another good example from the remote sensing industry, taking pictures of the Earth from space or aircraft. It's a holistic, end-to-end standardized industry now, where everything from the sensor model that describes the camera characteristics to the encoding format of the data to the distribution mechanisms and cataloging of the data are all based on open standards, and has enabled this marketplace to fuse content derived from commercial entities like the commercial satellite and aerial photography companies to governments like NASA and the European Space Agency providing all sorts of data, and comprehensive catalogs that enable not just discovery and fusion of data, but also commerce against that data, and completely in an open environment. It's an absolutely great example.
Fantastic. Yeah, it's great. Carl, do you have an example of, in your experience, where either standards are adopted or need to be adopted and they haven't been yet?
I would probably add a couple to that list. One is, as I mentioned, the which again is similar to Neil's example from the gaming industry, and that is from the defense simulation industry. So the structure that evolved into IEEE 1516 for distributed simulation included data interchange, runtime infrastructure, and actual development processes for individual and large-scale distributed simulations, which again is very similar to the evolving AR architecture as we're looking at multi-user, multi-location augmented reality environments. So I think that's an interesting one, because when it breaks it down into kind of the low-level pieces of data interchange and data formats and data ontologies, but also combines it with execution and development process standards and verification and validation standards, you end up being able to ensure that whatever you get out of the end of the pipeline actually is truly interoperable. And I think the other one that is continues to evolve and emerge is the work that the Industrial Internet Consortium is doing. Again, IoT Industry 4.0 is a mess of standards of various types, with sensors and equipment not being able to communicate with each other, and multiple standards that are evolving, OU FWA and MQTT and all of these other ones that don't talk to each other, and how do you make them and enable the equipment to be interchangeable. And one of the strategies that they've taken, which I think is really valuable as part of that process, is interoperability test beds and demonstration through working groups of how systems interoperate and how you can use those test beds to evolve standards and develop verification and validation methods to ensure that systems and component level environments can be given the seal of approval.
That's a really great example and a great point. And I hope that that one day there will be test beds and so forth for augmented reality, and probably they will need to be test beds for different use cases in different industries. Just given what we know about the diversity of products and the requirements for those, the different data sets, the different requirements for the people working in those. Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate very much your participation today, and I hope that a few of you, if not all of you, will be able to participate in this workshop that we're going to be conducting in January 14th in Boston. This is focusing on enterprise AR interoperability and helping enterprises specify and describe their standards in a consistent and useful way, a way that can be well consumed or can drive the development of new work. Thank you all for attending today's webinar, and I hope that it's been valuable, and I look forward to continuing the conversation going forward. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.